It is November 6th, 2024, and we have officially survived the 2024 presidential election here in the United States. We actually have a winner, which is something that we couldn't say at this point back in 2020. Now, if you've been watching videos here on my channel, then you probably have gotten the feel that I didn't really care who won. I didn't vote for anyone, right? I'm kind of coming into this situation knowing that no matter who wins, who loses, the US establishment still wins at the end of the day. But even with all of that said, I do still think that there are some very important lessons to be learned from this election cycle. Some lessons that Democrats could learn. I don't know if they necessarily will about, selecting a candidate and then forcing her on your voters and making your entire platform about beating the orange man and not paying attention to the policies that the people actually want at the end of the day. Oh, and then ignoring an ongoing genocide that the US is currently funding and enabling. And as you may have noticed, today is Wednesday, which means that it's the one day of the week that I devote to my paid subscribers with a new episode of my weekly series called Sanction. You can find that over on my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. Or you can also find it on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/rachelblevins. In this week's episode of Sanction, we dive into the results from the election. I kind of give my reactions on a number of different areas that I think are important to highlight. And then I get into what we know about Trump's foreign policy. Okay, we know that Trump is the winner. We know that he's going to get started with his transition team over the next couple of months. He's going to be picking his all too important cabinet members. And so while in last week's episode of Sanction, I really focused in on a second term of the Trump administration, what that would look like in regards to foreign policy, specifically on Ukraine and Russia. In this week's version, we look at the Middle East and the question of what Trump will try to do, as I know that he has campaigned heavily in the last week on saying that he wants to bring peace to the Middle East as he was trying to gain the Arab American vote here in the US. So we'll dive into what Trump could actually do once he's inaugurated, and also that important question of what happens between now and then, and how someone like Netanyahu is going to try to take advantage of the US and its lame duck administration over the next 2 months. But as I did last week, since you're not getting a full video on the free feed this week, I wanted to at least show you a preview of what you're missing out on behind the paywall. So let's take a look at this week's episode of Sanctioned.
We had no wars. 4 years, we had no wars, except we defeated ISIS. We defeated ISIS in record time, but we had no wars. They said, he will start a war. I'm not going to start a war. I'm going to stop wars.
Okay, so did Trump start any wars in his first term? Well, I guess not in the traditional sense. However, I wouldn't say that he ended any wars. I mean, under his first term, you saw U.S. bombing in Afghanistan soar. You saw civilian casualties skyrocket as well. You saw the U.S. still bombing Iraq, while the U.S. did withdraw some troops from Syria that were illegally occupying Syria. They still left plenty there, and Trump claimed at the time that they were there to steal the oil from the sovereign nation of Syria. And in terms of this fight against ISIS that he's claiming, where he's saying that we defeated ISIS, well, the Trump administration was also the one that assassinated Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, who was at the forefront of the fight against ISIS. So you don't get to claim that, oh, you defeated ISIS quickly when you're literally going after the good guys in the region who were also going after ISIS. Which brings me back to the fact that Trump did Israel's bidding in every possible sense of the word during his first term. I mean, he moved the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. He illegally recognized the occupied Syrian Golan Heights as part of Israel. And on top of that, his team, specifically with his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, they were so focused on what was good for Israel in the region that I genuinely believe that these steps that were taken during his first term, that emboldened Israel, and that led us to where we are today, where Israel is carrying out an all-out genocide of the Palestinians before our very eyes. And yet Trump will try to put that all on the Biden administration, and they are guilty for that as well, right? They are enabling that genocide as we speak. But I do think that the Trump administration played a role in getting us to the current place that we are when it comes to tensions in the Middle East. And that's not even to mention the Trump administration allowing arms sales to violent neo-Nazi extremists in Ukraine, or pulling out of a key nuclear deal with Russia, or trying to overthrow the democratically elected government of Venezuela, but you get the picture there. And I know that I will get comments from people that say, but look at the people that Trump had around him during his first term, right? Look at John Bolton and Elliot Abrams and Mark Milley, and the list goes on because this man had a lot of neocons around him. And that's a fair point. But then I also wonder, is he going to change things entirely in a second term? I mean, I know that he's got RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard and even JD Vance, who is speaking logically about Ukraine in some ways, but at the same time, he also has not completely cut off ties with people like Mike Pompeo or Nikki Haley, right? Those neocons who never met a war that they didn't like, who are so hungry for more war, especially at such a vital time for not just the US, but the entire world in terms of this road to World War III. And speaking of Mike Pompeo, Trump's former Secretary of State was present at his final campaign rally in Pittsburgh on Monday night, in which he literally sat there and claimed that if there is a second Trump term, that the US is going to support Israel and that they are going to take down what he referred to as the Ring of Fire led by Iran in the Middle East.
We will bring peace back to the world. We will take down the Ring of Fire. We will support our friends in Israel, but he's going to need help to do that.
And that right there is one of my biggest concerns about Trump and a second Trump administration, because while I do think that he does look at the Middle East and that he genuinely wants to see peace there, you know, in some of his recent campaign rallies, these last ditch efforts to say, I am going to bring peace to the Middle East to try to get the Arab American vote, which he did so successfully in some areas of the country. In those places, at those rallies, when he's making those statements, I do think that he means it to a certain extent. And I also think it's possible that, you know, Trump is preparing for his second term. He calls up Netanyahu and he says, hey, I want to be the guy to get a deal, right? I want a deal that is going to free the Israeli hostages that are being held by Hamas in Gaza. At the same time, I want there to be some sort of a ceasefire. And I do think it's possible that Trump could try to pursue some variation of that. However, I think it's also very important to note this man doesn't care about the Palestinians. Right? He's made it very clear with his rhetoric on the campaign trail that he does not care how many Palestinian children are killed by Israel with weapons that were made in the USA. But what he does care about is how it looks to the rest of the world. He cares about how isolated the US and Israel become because of the all-out genocide that they are carrying out. So while he may not care about the genocide that's ongoing, he's going to care about how it makes the US look to the rest of the world. And I don't think that Trump wants his own version of becoming Genocide Joe, right? He doesn't want massive protests of people calling on him to stop the killing and the suffering in Gaza. So it is entirely possible that he could push Israel to pursue some sort of a deal. Now, my biggest concern with that is that Trump doesn't take office until January 20th of next year. That gives Netanyahu over 2 months to carry out the killing of as many Palestinians as he wants. Because who's going to stop him? The Biden administration is not going to stop him. I mean, Biden has bragged about what a Zionist he is. He's got people on his team who are the exact same way. You think Blinken is going to walk into a meeting with Netanyahu and actually tell him, hey, if you don't stop killing Palestinians, we are going to cut off weapons shipments to Israel? I don't expect Blinken to do that for 1 second. And I think that that's why you got that strongly worded letter from him last month that you did, which, by the way, that deadline is coming up. And clearly, Israel is not complying whatsoever. They're not doing anything to allow more humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip as they're carrying out an all-out siege of the around 400,000 Palestinians currently in northern Gaza. Now, they're not going to comply with what the U.S. is saying. So I will definitely be keeping an eye on Israel's conduct and their US-backed war crimes over the next 2 months, for really just fear that Israel looks at this and says, okay, we've got 2 months until Trump is demanding some sort of a deal. What can we get away with in these 2 months, and it's not going to be pretty. Now, that being said, even if a second Trump administration does garner some sort of ceasefire deal, we have to remember that they are still doing it with Israel's best interest in mind. This is all for Israel, right? It's all for trying to get normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia and trying to bolster Israel's presence in the Middle East no matter what. So it's not so much about putting an end to the genocide as it is just kind of covering it up and, packaging it up to be like, oh, everything's fine now, normalize ties with Israel. It's all good. They're not killing the Palestinians by nearly as much as they were when Biden was in office. But we have to remember that still does not make it the end of a genocide. Just because Israel isn't killing dozens of Palestinians on a daily basis does not mean that they are no longer trying to wipe out the Palestinians from their own territory, as they are very clearly doing right now, and as I believe that they will continue to do in the future. And as far as Middle East tensions go, I'm also extremely concerned about what that means for US tensions with Iran in particular. If anything in this video resonated with you, and if you want to support my work, then consider signing up as a paid subscriber. You can check out my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you can catch new weekly episodes of Sanction. You can also find it over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/rachelblevins. As always, thank you all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.